Okay, guys, I'm going to take up your fungus questions. So, how are fungi classified? Overall, they're classified according to morphology. So, in other words, their shape. So, we would look at things like thread-like fungi, sac-like fungi, etc. Question 2, how do fungi reproduce asexually? And explain the following. So, this is how they reproduce asexually through budding and fragmentation. Budding is when a little section of the cell breaks off and becomes its own cell, and fragmentation is very, very similar to that. So it breaks off and produces a whole new organism. Okay? So you get a little piece and then it'll break off and produce a new organism. Here, budding is a little bit more like mitosis, where the bud gets larger and larger. Why should you throw out a whole loaf of bread if only one piece is moldy? Because we know that the spores are living on it. So as soon as you get proof of that, you've got this huge fungal colony at one end of the loaf, you know already that the rest of the loaf has been infected with that the fungus. You just can't see it yet. It's still microscopic. How do fungi reproduce asexually? Okay, and use the following, or sorry, sexually, and use the following to help you answer this question. So fungi reproduce through their hyphae, so they can mix gametes through the hyphae. So they're going to be exchanging genetic information, so exchanging DNA, and then they will send out spores as a result. Okay, so you're going to get, we're going to just pretend that we've got male and female parts here. So we've got male and the female. If this was a human, you know that the sperm's DNA would enter, and you've got the female DNA, the sperm's DNA, and that would be fertilization. So once that happens, we would call this a spore. And again, I'm using a male and female egg and a male sperm there, just so you understand. Obviously, the fungi are not going to have the sperm in the egg, but that would become a spore. We've got sharing of genetic information, and so that's what makes it sexual, and this would go dormant until it lands on the proper area. So what are gametes? The male, the cell that contains the male's or one of the fungi's DNA, and then another gamete would contain the other fungi's DNA. Okay, so gametes are basically sex cells. How do fungi help most ecosystems? So they help them with symbiotic relationships, for instance, with lichen, and they also help them with, sorry, just my phone showed me it was on low power mode, and they also help them through being decomposers. What other microorganisms other than fungi are saprophytes? So here your answer would be bacteria. Bacteria help to decompose waste products. Sorry. What are lichens? Lichens are a combination of a plant and a fungus. Okay, and so you would have read about that. And if you are curious about that, you're going to find information on that on page 83. Okay. What is mutualism? Mutualism is an example of, lichen is an example of mutualism. Mutualism means that two different organisms are living together and they're both benefiting from the relationship. Okay, so we show that as a win-win. All right, so some relationships are when both organisms benefit. It's a positive for each of them. On the other side of that, you could have like parasitism, right? And I think there's going to be a question on that in a minute. So parasitism is a win-lose. So the parasite wins and the host loses. So mutualism is always a really good thing because you've got two winners. Commensalism, you don't have to know this, I'm just giving you a little bit of extra information. Commensalism is when you have a winner and then the other organism in the relationship doesn't benefit or doesn't get harmed, okay? So they're neither harmed, it's just a completely neutral relationship for one and the other one benefits. All right, but what we're looking at today, mutualism means win-win. How are fungi used in industry? Give 3 examples. So hopefully you guys are not waiting just for me to give you the examples, but you've looked it up. We can use them to make foods. So for instance, we can use them to make bread. We can use them in terms of making alcohol, okay? And we can use them as medicine in terms of penicillin. What is fermentation? How does this help to make bread? Fermentation means that fungus break down sugars and make alcohols, okay? And when they're making that alcohol, they're giving off gases. Their waste product is a gas. And in many cases, that gas is carbon dioxide. And so what carbon dioxide does is it makes the bread rise. So how do we use them? to make bread, when they ferment the sugar in the bread, so you put sugar into your bread recipe, and when the fungi ferment the sugar, so when they're eating the sugar, literally eating it, their waste product is carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide makes the bread rise. It gives it bubbles of gas. How can farmers use fungus? Farmers use fungus in many different ways, but they can use fungus in association with plant roots because the fungus and the plant work together at exchanging nutrients. What is a parasite? A parasite is an organism that requires a host. So in other words, it lives off of something else. Okay, so it consumes from something else, and then something else gets harmed in the process. When we get into the animal kingdom, tomorrow you guys are going to see that. Okay, which plant diseases, and some protists are parasites as well, which plant diseases are fungi responsible for? So we're going to get corn smut, wheat rust, those guys. Which animal diseases are fungi responsible for? So which animal diseases? Yeast infections. And a yeast infection would also be like similar, you know what a yeast infection is, but athlete's foot is another form of a fungal infection is what I was trying to say. So I've got the picture here of athlete's foot, and I spoke to you a little bit about that. And then what is your overall opinion of fungi? That is totally up to you what you think about them, okay? The more I learn about them, the more I realize that they're way more complex than we ever realized, okay? So that's my opinion. Question 1 on page 85. Fungi were once placed in the same kingdom as plants. Would evidence suggest that fungi are very different from plants? So the first thing that comes to mind for me is the fact that plants are autotrophs and fungi are heterotrophs. So fungi have to consume. And based on that, that is a huge difference. Okay, if you have to consume, you can't be a plant because plants can photosynthesize and fungi cannot do that. Number 4 says, in the absence of oxygen, yeast ferment sugar. So they eat sugar, they break it down to obtain energy. That's their energy. The process releases carbon dioxide gas and ethanol alcohol, which is an alcohol. How do humans take advantage of this process in manufacturing of food and bread? So food, we're going to talk about anything that uses yeast, okay? Because yeast is put into bread and it makes it rise. So that's your answer for foods. Beverages will include your alcohols. So if you're baking your bread, you're making carbon dioxide gas with the yeast, and you're making alcohol. The alcohol leaves the bread because it evaporates in the oven. Okay, the high temperatures of the oven make that evaporate. But let's say you want to capture that alcohol, which is what the alcohol industry does. The brewing industry captures the alcohol. And so for different species of yeast or different species of fungi, you will get different alcohols being made. Okay, and so we use those alcohols in various ways. Right now during COVID-19, you know that we're using them, and they were, they were being used obviously for the hand sanitizer. And I don't know if you watched the news at the beginning of this pandemic, but a lot of people on Niagara-on-the-Lake were helping out because they make wine. So the wine industry jumped in and they said, okay, we're going to shut down our wine industry and we're going to use that waste product from the bacteria and the yeast and make hand sanitizers. So they switched it over to help people on the frontline workers get their hand sanitizers. Okay. And then question 5 says, describe the symbiotic relationships between fungi and leafcutter ants and fungi and cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is a certain type of bacteria that is a blue-green color. When you put these two together, you get lichens. Okay, so lichens, again, you can look that up, but I gave you information yesterday, and there's information on page 83 in your textbook about a lichen. This is even more interesting to me when you get ants in there working with fungus. So you read about the ants, hopefully. You're not just waiting for me to take the answers up. On page 84, I believe it is, they tell you about the leafcutter ants. So the ants go and get leaves, they cut them up, and you might think watching them that they're building a nest or that they're going to actually eat the leaves. But what they're doing is they're making a feast for fungus. So they're helping to break down the leaves into small pieces that the fungi can digest, because they're trying to grow fungus, and then the ants eat the fungus. That's what they want. But they have to encourage fungal growth by breaking the leaves up into small pieces so that the fungi can start to digest the leaves. The fungi are eating the leaves and the ants are eating the fungus, okay? And they've got it in just the right proportion that the fungus will continue to grow.